Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has a victory plan. After 2.5 years of war, actually closing in on now 3, not too far from here, apparently he's figured it all out, and now he's going to go to Washington, D.C., meet with President Biden, even Kamala Harris, also Donald Trump, and he's going to lay out his plan for victory. Don't get your hopes up too high that this is going to go anywhere. In fact, we've been doing some analysis on this. We've done a little bit on the channel so far. We're going to do even more today. Don't listen to any of it. Actually, there is no plan for a Ukraine victory. And the longer we go on with even courting this kind of misinformation, I think it's worse it's going to be for the Ukraine people, the worse it's going to be for Europe and the United States. And to try and unpack a lot of this stuff today, we have back after a hiatus one of our favorite guests, Jason Beardsley, former Green Beret Director of Vet Initiatives that Stand Together, former Trump advisor in the Trump administration. Welcome back, Jason. Been too long.
It has been a while. It's great to see you, Danny, and you're carrying the fight. We need that more than ever now when truth is hard to come by, isn't it?
It really is, and sometimes it's not clear whether people are being dishonest or just delusional. They think something's going to be true. I don't know, but what we do know is what is true and what is not true, and we're going to call the balls and strikes like we always do. And but let's get right into it. So Zelensky has been saying a lot of stuff. As people are aware, there was a big incursion into Kursk. A chunk of Russia was bitten out of that oblast there, and there continues to be Ukraine forces there today. A lot of people want to make a lot of that. We're going to get into some of that as well. But Zelensky's like saying that's actually part of his master plan. Watch this.
Курщина, як я вам сказав, входить в наш план перемоги України. Може, це звучить для когось амбітно, але план – це для нас дуже важливий план. Я деякі речі, напевно, щось можу сказати, не впевнений, що все. Один із напрямків, де частина якого вже зроблена, це Курщина. Другий напрямок – це стратегічне місце України в безпековій інфраструктурі світу. Третій напрямок – це пакет примусу, потужний пакет примусу Росії до закінчення війни дипломатичним шляхом. І четвертий напрямок економічний, про все це детально говорити не буду. План підготовлений. Думаю, справедливо, якщо я цей план представлю спочатку президенту Сполучених Штатів, від нього залежить успіх цього плану.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go with some of the details of that. Vox actually has some more details, at least of what's been publicly announced. We'll get that in just a second. But I just want your view, first of all, just on the concept of it all. After 2.5 years of war, especially the way things are going on the Eastern Front, we're going to get to that in a minute as well. What do you think when you first heard the victory plan for Volodymyr Zelensky?
Yeah, I think he opens up with precisely what's not being said. Behind the scenes in the Kursk Oblast, this region, is a metering station for the gas pipeline, liquid natural gas that's coming out of the Yamal oil fields up in northern Russia. And this, for Gazprom, the Russian oil giant, does about, I think it's about 80% of their LNG supplies to Europe. So Europe is, feeding the economy of Russia. Now, when Ukraine rolled into this oblast, one of the things they occupied, or they have occupied now, is the metering station there, which is where all the gas flows through. They pressurize it. They determine how much has gone through. And this secures the economic pipeline of LNG from Russia to Europe. And so if they own that piece, they can actually void contracts and cause Gazprom to be, let's say, rough-handled in the economic sense. And the Gazprom is a big part of the Russian industry. So this was not, by the way, some secret. It didn't come out of nowhere. If you look at Antony Blinken, his college thesis, I think, had to do with the oil fields in Russia and the pipelines. And so there is a war for oil and natural gas that has been underway for a while. And if you go all the way back to Seymour Hersh's article alleging that the United States had some hand in the Nord Stream pipeline, explosion. I mean, you don't even have to take Seymour's word for it. You can take the administration, President Biden, Kamala Harris, folks out of the White House indicated that they were not going to let Russia continue the Nord Stream pipeline. Next thing you know, it got blown up. It's been blamed on a Russian diver with a pair of scuba tanks or something like this, which is a farce, out of some movie. So what's really happening here is there's a war for natural resources, and you see that war, a shadow war, taking place in the Mediterranean Sea, where the Houthis, which run proxy operations for Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia, are threatening our oil supplies on the Med, and then what you see in Gaza and Israel. So these are all hanging together. What you think, I think you hear Putin, not Putin, but Zelensky talking about is stressing the diplomatic relations using economic blackmail and leverage by holding this terrain in the oblast. Whether he can pull that off or not, he just said it right there, has nothing to do with Ukraine, has everything to do with the United States. So he's using a bank shot to get the United States to increase our leverage against Putin to try to bring them back to the negotiating table. I understand it, but it's like trying to make a trick shot in pool. It requires a lot of physics, and we're about to go into an election, so probably not the best bet. But hey, man, more power to you for creativity.
Honestly, if we're using the trick shot analogy, it's like I'm trying to hit a triple backboard, off the post on the top and then into the bucket from another gym. Okay, yes. So you're not even in the right gym, so you're not making any kind of trick shot here. Right. Let's take a look at a little bit of what he says and look at some of the fundamentals here, because this is just, I don't know if this is disinformation or delusion or what, but there's almost no reality in this. Look, the four things that he said, there's a little bit more detail here in the Vox article. It says continuing Ukraine's recent incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Troops entered the area in early August and now hold more than 500 square kilometers of territory in an effort to pull Russian troops away from the front line in eastern Ukraine. Okay, so on the first point there, that didn't happen. Russia not only has not taken troops away from the key areas of especially Pokrovsk, Toretsk, and a couple of other areas to the south, now near Vuhledar. They actually, according to the report I saw this morning, are moving 8 brigades of reinforcements in. So they are actually increasing as the scale, and we're going to see this in a minute, the scale of the east-westward movement of the Russian forces is accelerating. And now then, because Ukraine didn't have those troops, those mobile troops, and the armored vehicles that went along with it, the well-trained troops, et cetera, they used some of their best up there because they didn't have them in the east. Now then, Russia is having an easier time because some of those troops and some of the troops that took part in that came from these areas of the east. So from a military perspective, first of all, let me ask you, what sense does it make to thin out your areas where you have the greatest strategic vulnerability to go after a triple bank shot up in the north?
This is not a well thought out military plan. There have been plenty of people who died on the planes on the way to Moscow thinking they could improve on previous chances, but it's a lot of supply line that has to get stretched out. So supplying the region of Oblast, which is in your enemy terrain now, that's in Russian hands, requires logistic lines, roads, bridges. It requires fuel and food and everything else it takes to sustain an army. So what all those little pieces supplying the soldiers in the Oblast now look like are targets for Russian air, Russian drone, Russian artillery, and those things can mount from within their home base. So Russia doesn't have to leave their positions in order to target vulnerable supply lines. Ukraine has to defend supply lines and extend that perimeter. Meanwhile, on the backside of the Russian, or the rather Ukrainian forces, are potential insurgents, revolutionary movements. You have people that will be trained at either the National Guards or even just regular peasants that can stand up and harass and interdict these rear lines. So a lot of this holding that 500 miles is actually extremely difficult. And the only reason it would make military sense, Danny, is if they had another play that they were ready to execute in coordination with this, which we have not seen. And you just heard Zelensky say there is no other plan. The plan is to go to the U.S., have them back us up, and take Russia at the diplomatic table down to its knees. And we're going to use as he indicates there, the security package of NATO, the threat of us being part of NATO. So what he's using is a lot of emotional leverage. If I can get the U.S. to let us into the big club and guarantee our security through NATO, and I've got a piece of their oil LNG pipeline, economically, I think that's enough to get Russia to back off. I think that's what Zelensky's thinking. The problem is he's going to have to run that through Washington, D.C., which is in chaos right now because they have one thing on their mind, and it's the election. They do not, it's not Zelensky, and it's not the oblast in Kursk. Americans aren't voting on that. So I'm sorry, he picked a really poor time. Military, you asked about the military strategy. Honestly, it isn't there. He's trying to combine a tactical military short-term, near-term strategy with long-term rhetorical, diplomatic, political gains. And my God, that's tough to do in the best of conditions. These aren't the best of conditions.
They're not. Gary, bring that Vox piece back up there again. I want to keep going down that list there. The next thing on the list was he said he wanted to ensure security architecture, a vague element that likely refers to Ukraine's potential membership in NATO and the European Union. So it's interesting for me. I get it that that's an aspiration. It never has been anything else. But to list that as part of your, quote, plan for victory to be accepted into NATO. Look, if there was ever a chance to be in NATO, it would have been in July in Washington at the NATO 75th anniversary, and he didn't get it. So why, upon what logic and ration do you say now that you're going to put it back on again, especially in an election year?
Well, he's going to offer President Biden a chip. This is not, I'm not saying it's reasonable, but he's going to say, look, if you want a victory before this November election, I'll hand it to you as long as you let us into NATO. And if you get that, the people are going to be happy. He's probably surmising that the politics behind this are much more than what they are. I think he's going to come and find a tone-deaf audience who's already had this argument. You pointed out the July summit, the 75 years of NATO, where they said explicitly it's not the right time. And then you have other members of NATO that include a wide range of players, including Hungary, that have options here to vote no on this, right? So This is not, it does not only rely on the United States, although we have the biggest leverage here because we give the most amount of money to this thing. At the end of the day, I think he's just trying to get the publicity generated that there can be a win here, but it's going to look like I get what I want, which is part of NATO. And that's going to let you come back with a victory in front of your people. You beat the big bad Russia. But honestly, these again are ploys that rely on some things that I'm not sure he really understands the American audience well. I mean, even an American politician is going to have trouble with that. But a Ukrainian politician really does not understand how America thinks. And right now, they do not think about, again, the oblast in Kursk.
Yeah, Jason, he doesn't even get the Russian side either, because bring that Vox piece back up here again. Point number 3 was one of the biggest eye-openers for me, because he says he wants to, quote, receive a powerful package, which I think is what he meant when he said he has to get this from the United States. It depends on them, like referring to weapons. And look, I mean, we had what it was a 6 or 9 month delay in them getting the $61 billion package that came early this year. Again, I'm going to refer to that in just a second because someone else has as well. But that came on the heels of this, relatively large packages that came in 2022, 2023, which proved to be completely useless on the battlefield. Everything they got to try and break this 5 levers of Russian defenses in the occupied territories broke their teeth on the first one. And ever since that time, really going back to like almost a year ago, they have been pushed further and further back to the West. And then we had the big $61 billion package that came in, had no impact at all. Didn't change anything, didn't slow down the Russians, didn't increase any capability for the Ukraine side. After all, the ballyhoo didn't make any difference on the ground. Now he's again saying, I just need another massive package of stuff. And all the things that have happened in the last 2.5 years of war are magically going to be different. This may be the biggest piece of delusion that I've seen. And I got to add one more piece to that before I get your take on it. This comes after Russia has spent all this time now building up its military. They're now almost double the size and actually quadruple the size in Ukraine proper, how many troops they have there, but their industrial capacity, their electronic warfare capacity, definitely their drone capacity, air defense, all these things are bigger than they ever have been. What the hell's going on?
I just want to be very clear because we've said this before, but this is a recurring theme that I'm going to take the audience right back to, and just as explicitly clean statement as possible. When you hear the salesman, the conman, the politician explaining to you that we're one magic weapon or one magic package away from winning the war, I could take you back to 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through the withdrawal of Afghanistan, where it was always the case that the next series of weapons, armament, or whatever would be the culminating factor for victory for our forces. Now, I had the pleasure, and so did you, to serve in our forces. And for our audience, this is a reminder. We had every weapon available to us. We had the most sophisticated defense industry. We had a plethora of new systems being developed all the time. At the end of the day, we were still getting beat by garage door openers, cell phone jammers, trinkets that were hodgepodge together on a battlefield by 14 and 15-year-old terrorist insurgents who are harassing our massive billion-trillion-dollar industry. I'm just here to explain it is never the weapons that will end the war or change the dynamic. It has a lot more to do with the supply of people, the morale, the planning, the in-depth capability to move and mobilize multiple forces. It is a very simple blocking and tackling type of feature that we see on the football field all the time. If you don't make your tackles, if you don't make your blocks, really doesn't matter how fancy your quarterback is or how great your wide receivers are, you can't get the ball down the field. This, Ukraine, is an example of not being able to block and tackle successfully. And by the way, a reminder again for our audience who has watched this incredible David and Goliath battle happen over the last 3 years, should remember that, David is out on the battlefield by himself with a slingshot. Ukraine is not David. Right behind Ukraine is the United States of America. If you go back to the New York Times, who talked about the 12 CIA bases that have been there since back in 2012, 2014, we have our intelligence industry woven together. We're providing fusion cells, tactical decision-making, airstrike capability, electronic warfare capability. I mean, Elon Musk turned on Starlink for him. These are not the same things that people are seeing. So the ability to analyze the Ukrainian army on its own without the United States, first of all, you have to see what their capabilities are on their own. They don't have the manning or the sustainability and leadership or non-commissioned officer corps. They have not done that for decade after decade. Now that they're pressing into what is an offensive fight, they still are going to have to rely on the United States to stitch together their battlefield command, their unity of effort, their unity of force. And to do that, proxying from our nation in places like Poland and Germany and Hungary and neighboring states, and right there, of course, in Ukraine, these are really tough prospects. So to put rest to it, there is no magic package of weapons that are going to solve this unless you're talking about nuclear, and nobody wants that, right? That's not a solve either, by the way. That's just a bloody mess. But in the meantime, there's not a special series of weapons that once they get it in their hand, it's going to be victory. You have to fill those weapons. You have to supply them. There's supply chains. There's defense of the lines. There's coordinating all these things together. That's what's missing here. So don't be fooled by the con men who step in front of the camera, hold their hand out, and ask for more money because they just need one more tranche of weapons, one more tranche of billions of dollars to make this thing happen. It's not going to happen.
Okay, so obviously the F-16 was the previous one that was going to happen, and we see now today how that physically worked out on the battlefield like we all expected it was going to, as it was either crashed or shot down, one or the other. I don't know which. It's unclear right now, but we do know that in combat it suddenly went down. One of only 6 that they had with their best pilot. I'll point out that was the interesting thing. But that's not the last one. That was the latest. That was the previous one. The current one is we need, and this is what Zelensky, the salesman, just like you just described, is out saying, what we need to do is have long-range weapons and more of them, the ability to strike anywhere in Russia. Here's what Zelensky said 2 days ago.
Не зраджує, це хвора істота, всім вже давно зрозуміло, але так само зрозуміло він може робити тільки те, що світ йому дозволяє робити. Слабкість, недостатність рішень у відповідь живить терор. І кожен лідер, кожен наш партнер знає, які сильні рішення потрібні, щоб всю цю війну припинити і припинити справедливо. Не може бути в Україні обмежень в далекобійності, коли у терористів немає таких обмежень. Не може бути у захисників життя обмежень у зброї, коли Росія використовує і власну зброю всіх типів, і шахеди, і балістику з Північної Кореї. Америка, Британія, Франція, інші партнери мають силу, щоб допомогти нам зупинити терор. Потрібні рішення.
So you see there that the latest one that's going to change everything is we need to be able to fire long-range weapons anywhere we want to in Russia, and you should just give us every damn thing that we're asking for, and then finally you'll see a change on the battlefield. But that is a coin that has two sides, and the other side also has a play. We seem to think these things too many times in just the isolation here, but so that's what Zelensky has said. In direct response, here is what Sergei Lavrov replied with.
A doctrine of using nuclear weapons, among other things, and we are now making adjustments to this doctrine, reaffirm this once again, that playing with fire, and they are like little kids who are playing games with matches. It's a dangerous thing for adults who were trusted with nuclear weapons in West country.
So he's saying right there, and it was reiterated by other members as well, that if you literally just go on a wild spree and you're going to start shooting stuff all over our country, you are crazy if you think that your oceans are going to protect you. There is a limit. Now, I know that we think that Russia always says that there's a red line and there never is. Ironically, most of those red lines we ourselves said were red lines, whether Russia did or not. And so when they were, quote, passed and Russia didn't do anything, then the idea is there are no red lines and there never will be. You remember when Zelensky first invaded into the Kursk area, he ridiculed the West. How naive you were for thinking that Russia would ever respond to anything. Just go for broke and give us everything we want. Is he right, or is there a red line?
Well, listen, I think there's a sophisticated play here. When you listen to Lavrov, what I think you're hearing is Zelensky saying exactly that. We are asking for Russia to threaten the West in order that the West now joins us in this fight. It's all win for Zelensky. If the United States and France and Britain all come in and decide we're going to go to war with Russia, that's a huge victory for Ukraine. They don't have to bear this burden by themselves, and then they get us to fight their war for them. So I think he's ratcheting up this rhetoric, knowing that if he can stir up Russia and Russia gets agitated enough and starts using this rhetoric to dial up the needle a little bit, his hope, I believe, Zelensky's hope, is that the United States perceives that as, wow, Russia really is threatening us, so we better go hit them first. In other words, he's trying to sucker us into a fight. This is like going into the bar with your friend who starts to make fun of the biker gang that's in there. And next thing you know, your friend ditches out the front door and you're left fighting the rest of these bikers by yourself. That's what Zelensky's hope is here. He's hoping to transition this war from Ukraine v. Russia to the West v. Russia. That's why the NATO play is important. And that's why if he strikes indiscriminately at targets inside Russia, his hope, I believe, is that Russia will then react in such a way that leaves the West with no choice but to go all in on this war. He wants American bodies on the ground fighting his enemy. That's a benefit to him. He's running out of people. So the only way to parlay this trick into the next 10 years and potentially eke out a victory is if he convinces, or Russia convinces, Britain, France, and the United States and Germany to come in on this. It's a terrible prospect.
Okay, so here's a short clip from CNN earlier today talking about that plan. This is today, and watch this, and then I'm going to ask you a question on the backside.
CNN has learned that 2 top Ukrainian officials will present the Biden administration with a list of targets inside Russia. A Ukrainian lawmaker tells CNN that face-to-face meetings are set to happen before the week is out in an effort to push the U.S. to lift restrictions on the use of American weapons against Russia.
Okay, so you see, they're coming. To your point, exactly what you just said. They're on their way. They're probably in the air as we speak right now to come and do that. Here's the question I have of you. Given all the realities that we should know and the administration, first of all, why is the administration even taking this meeting? But then second of all, and probably the more important here, what do you think the United States is going to do when these guys land?
If we look at past as a predictor of where we're going to go, they'll take the meetings, they'll have these discussions, and they're going to have to play coy to a certain degree, because it would be political suicide to just underwrite a blank check for Zelensky to do what he wants in Russia. That would be political suicide right before an election. On the other hand, he can't really turn it all the way off, because he's got a contingency in his constituent base that is seeking a victory for Ukraine. They've convinced a lot of people that Ukraine is the linchpin for democracy. When Ukraine falls, you will all have problems, voting. Nobody will be able to get a cheeseburger anymore at McDonald's. The whole world changes, right? That's the premise. So those that believe that are waiting for signals from the United States. What will we do to win this war? And the real answer, the administration knows this, is there is no real win without the U.S. putting all in and putting all our chips on the table, which they're not ready to do.
Harry,
So the hopes are that they blow this back a little bit, give Zelensky a proper welcoming, pat him on the back, explain how great he's done, and talk about, we'll consider this over time. But if they take this more seriously and make ovations that give him the essence of a blank check, then you can say, get ready for another draft. It's ready. We're almost there, right? We're not there at this stage. And I don't think the administration wants to get us there. How they get out of it is going to be a little bit of political negotiating. You're going to see probably Kamala Harris have to take the lead in this, depending on what this comes down to. I give them credit. It's a tough play to make, and they're trying to make it on the backs of the American constituent, and they've used victory and democracy as the only reasons here for us. What we have to be careful about are the men and women in harm's way, both Ukrainian and Russian and American, who can be involved in an escalating conflict that can look as bad as it did in places like World War I and World War II. And if that's something people are excited about, I think they might have to at least answer to their kids, their grandkids, and future voters in America, what was it that was so important? And if the answer is Putin or bad, Russia bad, that's not as articulate as something like the Nazis are now massacring, millions of Jews in the death camps or something like that. That's a pretty clean, articulated statement. We don't have anything like that here. So the Americans have the right to ask, what is at stake? What is the sovereignty of the United States require in order to protect the United States? Yeah. And, oh, by the way, reduce my interest rates while giving me the security that we can trade fairly with partners across Europe. And again, I'll put the shadow war in the background. There's a lot of liquid natural gas war happening right now, whether it's Russia, the United States. We're trying to depose another world power so we can compete one-on-one with near-peer rival China. But what that means is it's a messy road to get to that dominance. But that's why a lot of people in DC are excited about this prospect, is because they're looking for the unipolar or multipolar world again, where the U.S. can have the big bad liquid natural gas play in Europe and depose Russia as the main player there. If we did that, that would be a secure economic victory for politicians, and they would take that for the next 80 years and celebrate it.
Yeah. Well, here's a problem with, or one of the many problems actually with that, it's a kind of a fly in the ointment issue, is that time is not on Ukraine's side. Even if Biden wants to massage this and just kind of pat him on the back, as you say, to buy time and just push it down, kick the can down the road a little bit, Russia is moving in the east in ways that they may not be able to kick that can down the road a whole lot longer. Watch this report here from France 24 earlier on today, talking about what's happening in the east, and pay particular potential attention to the beginning of this, where he tries to talk about how this was actually America's fault for delaying money in the first place. Watch.
Yeah.
They took the town of Avdiivka back in February, in large part because of the failure of the United States to provide weaponry over several months to Ukraine. But since then, the Russians have managed to grind forward another 30 kilometers or so, and now we're within about 10 kilometers of Pakrovsk. The thing, too, about Pakrovsk is they don't actually need to take the town itself. All they need to do is be close to it, and then they can control the road and rail links, because they can fire their artillery and make it impossible for the Ukrainians to supply those towns that I was talking about, towns like Vuhledar to the southwest, Konstantinivka, Horlivka, Kramatorsk, up towards the north. If they can do that, it makes life really tough for the Ukrainians.
Okay, and it's actually even worse than that, really tough. I'm going to show you real quick a clip. Well, actually, before I show you that clip there, I wanted to get your comments on the specific claim that it was America's fault for slow rolling, given the $61 billion that caused the loss of Avdiivka, because that kind of makes me think, okay, hang on. Using your logic there, then once we gave that money, things should have gotten better, but instead they have accelerated in the decline toward the Russian. How do you see that?
It's a ridiculous statement, and we shouldn't hold comments like that seriously at all. It's the United States who actually allowed Ukraine to even foment a defense of any sorts over the last 3 years. And if it wasn't for us all along the way, there would not have been a proper defense of Kyiv and all these other locations. The very mere fact that they couldn't take the offense and restrict or retard Russia's progress or even incurs further into Russia is not because the United States is at fault here. It's because the Ukrainians never had a substantive plan or program for military success to offend a larger, more well-supplied first world military power. The very fact that we can help them even sustain that defense ought to be noble enough. But for someone to come off the ropes and accuse the United States of somehow failing Ukraine here is a really poor read of history. And it also ignores the great Russian plan that we see throughout history, which is they just wait it out. Russia is phenomenal about waiting and putting peasants on the front line to grind you down over time, because they don't fight the same way we do in the West. They fight with en masse type of programs. The way we fight is strategic, it's tactical, it's built on creativity. That's not Russia. Russia will just sit on you until you're weak, and then they'll start to grind, and that's what you're seeing.
And and part of the reason why some people believe that's the guy from France 24, but one American commentator is very frequent with kind of share that same thing. And here's actually a similar version of it's America's fault why Ukraine is not already winning. Watch this one.
I think our sort of weakness is what actually provokes them, not giving ATACMS to the Ukrainians, but our weakness is what provokes them to feel like these guys are not going to do anything. And so that's why they feel emboldened to do what they do.
Ukraine is successfully conducting multi-domain operations in accordance with NATO training and strategic precepts. Successful long-range precision strikes against Russian energy and transportation infrastructure, a land-centric counteroffensive in Kursk that is changing the war's momentum and narrative. Should allies just provide munitions and get out of the way instead of imposing red lines?
So you see that General Hodges says that it's only because we haven't given enough stuff fast enough, and we should have given them long range missiles a lot longer ago, and our weakness is what's drawing Russia in. Is the context is there? And then this other British commentator on whose show Hodges was there talks about this basically this well-oiled machine that's conducting this multi-combination offensive into the Kursk area. And we just need to give them missiles and then get out of the way. When you hear stuff like that, to people who don't know, it's like, okay, well, he was a 3-star general, and this guy's kind of, somebody who's listened to a lot in the UK, and he's got a big channel. So, wow, they must be right because they sound like they really know what they're talking about. Square that with reality.
Well, the reality is a 3-star general. General Hodges hasn't won a war, so he's not the best one to make commentary on this. We lost our wars, right? So if this is the guy telling you, here's how we win war, get him out of the way because he hasn't won one. In the old days, you fire non-performers. That's why we had to go through generals to get to guys like Grant or get to guys like MacArthur or get to guys like Patton. He's no Patton. He's no MacArthur. If he wants to talk about strength, then let's talk about the strength of the United States of America facing down a non-state actor in a third world country in the middle of the desert, and we couldn't do it. So I'm not even interested in that. And guys on the ground understood what tactical victory meant. We can hand that to you all day long. But when you squander strategic victory through your politicians and your rhetoric, and then the follow-up with the British guy and his clean accent, it sounds so wonderful and precise the way he says it. He's got that Mary Poppins sound to it, so he must be right. No, poppycock, take that throw it in the garbage. Like, just because he says it with a clean accent means nothing. These guys are talking about stuff that they don't know. On the ground, war is about energy, and it's about mass, and it's about staying power, and it's really about grinding through and through these cities and the ditches and the slugfest, and everybody on each side is amplifying their weapon systems. There is no clean victory here because numerically Ukraine can't do it. And for everybody who continues to go back to the magic button of one more magic weapon and we can get there, that is not how war is won. Now, yes, if you take all the magic weapons to war and you have the manpower and you have the strategy and you have the combined arms and you have the politics lined up, yes, you can win. But you rarely see that, and we're certainly not seeing it here. So, number one, to have these guys pontificating from the back while 500,000 people are dying on the front lines is a little bit cheeky. And number two, when it's not your risk, when you're talking about the blood and treasure of another nation here, you ought to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more somber, a little sober about the actual prospects that there is some kind of victory. Victory is soldiers on the ground holding ground in defense of withering odds. And withering odds in places like down in the Luhansk and Donetsk province since 2014, the Ukrainians have not been able to successfully defend those provinces. That's why Russia integrated their forces there. And that's why when they rolled past the river to the west, they had a little bit of staying power. Now we're back to where it's been for the last 10 years. And so for people to quip just casually, if we just strike Moscow, if we just throw ATACMS missiles into strategic locations, everything will get better. That is a fool's errand. And that's how you get to places like the Archduke Ferdinand gets shot in an alley somewhere in an open car. And next thing you know, hundreds and millions of people are dying in the fields of the Somme, right? This is what ends up as the bloody wars that we can't end because these people take us into war so casually that they have no concept of what it actually means for young men and young women to be injured at a rate that we haven't seen since World War I and World War II. So let's not be as casual about this, and let's take them to task every time somebody suggests that some fancy weapon is how we solve a war. That's not it. War is solved through blood on blood conflict, and it's bare knuckle dragging, and it ends in the dirt and in the mud with spit and piss and vinegar all over and cut open scars and wounds. And we come home from those battlefields for 20 and 30 years trying to recover families, trying to get over alcoholism, trying not to put a gun in our mouth and commit suicide. This is not some clean antiseptic thing that you can apply from your easy chair in Washington, D.C. It's very frustrating to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's very, very well said. It kind of reminds me of this overall situation. Reminds me of something that a parable that Jesus once told in the Bible that says that someone who's going to build a house should first go and make sure and count the cost and make sure they have the resources and the materials in order to finish it. Otherwise, they'll look foolish if they start and then can't finish. Make sure you count the cost. And when you do that, apply that in a situation like this, you have to see all the things you just mentioned very eloquently that go into winning or losing a war. And if you count the requirements and count the costs, the count is insufficient funds.
Yes.
They don't have it, so that it can't win, and all it can do is get more people killed. And that's unfortunately where we are. So when we hear Zelensky saying he has this victory plan in light of all of the stuff that we've seen so far, and you see the count continuing to build up on the advantage of the Russian side, it becomes near suicidal to continue going on. So I'm really glad you made such clarity on that last point right there. Before we let you go, I want to slightly shift base here a little bit, because you were on television earlier this week on MSNBC, and you made some comments about some things going on in the Middle East there, especially as it had to do with some of the hostage situation, which has been kind of one of the big points of contention, especially among the American side, because some of these hostages are American. And you made some comments here, and I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit for us. So first of all, Gary, roll that tape.
So what you're really seeing is a larger geopolitical shift. This is about regional balance of power. The Shia Muslims up in Iran, and Iran is facing a very dire consequence in their own home front. Extraordinary executions. The people, a very low percentage in the turnout at the election. So they're really using a lot of this as a distraction to get to the hostage, which was your question. The hostage release is going to be like threading a needle, and it's going to require a lot of diplomacy. But I got to be honest with you. To if you're sitting in Palestine, if you're sitting on the other side of this coin, watching the two intel chiefs, part of this negotiation is not going to breed confidence. So I think we have to look at that and question, what are the real signals being sent here?
So what are the real signals being sent here? Because you described a very, very complicated, multi-layered, contradictory kind of animal there. What does this say for the hope of a negotiated settlement or even a ceasefire to get hostages back?
Well, thank you for playing that. It's a very difficult thing to do in a TV short clip because it is very complex. And what I was pointing to is the fact that, number one, there's a geopolitical struggle in the Middle East that involves the Iranian major force against what are the Sunni allies. So think Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and really pretty much everybody we've been dealing with for the last 20, 30 years. So what that meant is when Iran is utilizing its power, it uses forces like the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the IRGCQ, and they are throughout the world. So it's a big money-making scam for them. But they also fund and fuel Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been instrumental in taking control in Lebanon, or at least disturbing the controls in Lebanon. So from Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Palestine to the Houthis on the Red Sea, Iran has influence and is enabling its proxy fighters to go after the United States, either directly or indirectly. And again, we talked about the Houthis firing on our merchant ships in the Red Sea. That constricts our trade. That's a merchant line. Then you talk about in Iraq, where our troops are being fired upon by Iranian proxy forces, or killed in Jordan down in Tower 22 by Iranian proxy forces. That's them coming after the United States. When Lebanon and the Hezbollah in the southern region of Lebanon starts firing missiles at Israel, that's them putting pressure on Israel along the north in Lebanon and then the south in Hamas. What I was talking about that makes this difficult is the negotiation for the hostages. Right now, you have the Mossad and the CIA chiefs, the directors of Mossad and CIA, as part of that negotiation. So what I was trying to intimate, without being too blunt about this or brutal, is when your spy chiefs are involved, the two Western spy chiefs, CIA, Mossad, with the negotiation for the hostages, how do you think the Hamas Palestinians receive that? I mean, anybody that thinks Hamas is looking at that like this will be a fair deal is fooling themselves. Even Iran, when they said we delayed our attack, the Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah up in Lebanon, said we delayed our attack because we wanted the negotiations to be successful. No, they didn't. Hassan Nasrallah, who leads Hezbollah, has led them since 1992. His predecessor was killed, who is sitting in Lebanon, utilizing as much power as he can on behalf of Iran, is saying, he's quoted as saying, we were going to wait for CIA and Mossad to give us a deal, but it doesn't look like they're going to get one. That's a lie. So what's happening is, on the surface, all of these players are using political rhetoric to negotiate back and forth, but the real play, the real thing happening here is Iran is using everything it can to keep the West off balance, particularly because in Tehran and in regions in Iran, the people are angry. They're tired of dealing with the mullahs. They're tired of the oppression. They're reaching out and they want help to overthrow the regime, but they can't do it on their own. So the regime is arresting them. They're executing them. They're kidnapping them. They're putting them through extraordinary pressures on the home front, which is hard to withstand, which is why the voter turnout in the Iranian elections was so low. So what they're doing is distracting. They're distracting from their home problems by creating other problems in other regions. That's the chaos you see with Hezbollah. That's the chaos you see with Hamas. And at the end of all that, it's because the Mossad and the CIA chief are involved in this negotiation with Qatar and Egypt and Jordan, that there's something bigger at work. Yes, there's part of this that has to do with the hostages, but more of this is likely to be about regional power shifts and trying to keep one side off balance while enforcing the other. So there's a lot going on. It's really hard to do that in a 2-minute news clip. Frankly, most people don't deserve that level of abuse, but you open up the format here so we can do that a little bit.
We did, yeah. But so, I mean, I hesitate to even ask the question, but what's the solution? Because I mean, these things have been going on obviously for decades, and I guess in the bigger picture, things that nothing's going to get solved in the foreseeable future. And all this war over the last 10, 11 months has ensured that it's generational, separate. But those hostages are alive right now, so it's got to be done in the near term, or they're all going to end up dying probably. Is there anything that could be done to get the hostages back?
Well, I think it's smart to look at history a little bit and understand that for Israel, the long play is more important than the short play. Now, they're not going to say that out loud, and they're not going to come into the cameras and say it. But the raid on Entebbe and other places has been a determination by the state of Israel that the sovereignty of Israel is more important than the individual sovereignty at the local level. So at the end of the day, they will risk the long-term safety and security of their people. They won't risk that for the near-term safety and security of the hostages. That's why you see this playing out the way it is. Israel was patient. They waited from October 7th. They let everything play out the way they ought to. So Hamas is stirred up, Hezbollah is stirred up, Iran is stirred up, but they don't have a lot to go on. That attack that Iran did on Sunday, and that was retaliated by the Israelis, or the Israeli preemptive attack, whatever you want to call that, was a really nice indicator that everybody's at a stasis point. They're ready to go.
Hezbollah. You said Iran. You meant Hezbollah.
I did. You're right.
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
So Israel did the preemptive strikes against Hezbollah, which then launched 340 rockets into northern Israel, where the people have been moved out of their houses. And then they were mostly defended. This wasn't a lot on both sides. And if you listen to Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah chief up in Lebanon, and if you listen to Netanyahu, the Israeli state chief there, they both said, yeah, we're pretty good right now, but we're not done. We can open up more if we need to. They're basically saying, this is the signal. We're cool. Things are cooling down. Everything's fine. It's going to take a little while. They're not going to get the hostages back anytime soon, but the prospects of getting them back are better because they've waited, because they've been patient, and because Hamas and Hezbollah are running out of options. Every option they've had, they've played. Iran does not want a war. Hezbollah does. Maybe they want one. Who knows?
I don't think they want one. I don't think they want one.
Probably not, because Hezbollah, for people that don't realize, the country of Lebanon is run by 3 different parties, so Christian, Sunni, and Shia, right? And Hezbollah is just a party to the parliament. They have 13 seats out. I think it's 248. So they have a little bit of sway there, but they live safely in the southern hills, in the Bekaa Valley, along the Litani River, and places that they can kind of shoot and scoot with Hiluxes and missiles. They're not accurate missiles. So it's a real sense of guerrilla insurgency. And one of the things I pointed out on MSNBC was they're shooting $500, $1,000 rockets into Israel. Israel has to defend those with $100 billion planes and $40 million, missile systems. I said $100 billion, it's $100 million planes, maybe $80 million if you get the cheap stuff. But the point is, every single $500 missile on the one side or rocket cost somewhere around 150 million on the other side. That drones, or the Iron Dome system, is expensive. So part of what Hezbollah is doing
are hugely expensive.
Exactly. So part of what Hezbollah is doing in Iran through Hezbollah is just burning through Israeli resources. They're burning through Western resources. It's a game. It's economical. It keeps people from looking at Tehran and finding out. I think they had 800 or 600 executions this year. That's extraordinary.
It's incredible.
That's extraordinary. And people aren't even talking about that. So that's what's being missed here.
Yeah. That's true. And that's just shows how complicated this is. But we'll have you back on that where you can talk a little bit more about that topic or everything else that seems to be happening in between now and then. But in any case, thank you so much for all of this today. It's been very, very enlightening. Some of your analogies were really good. Appreciate that.
It's always a great time, Danny. Appreciate being back with you. And you have a great day and keep up the good work. Somebody's got to do it out there. So
all right, man. Appreciate that. And we certainly appreciate you guys as well. And we thank you very much for coming on today. Also want you to know, Deep Dive is very excited to announce that you can finally get your friends to hear Deep Dive when right now, for those who can only listen to podcasts, they're the ones who might not watch a YouTube video or perhaps can. You can now send them to Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Deezer, Spotify, wherever they listen. Pretty much anywhere. Just tell them to search for Daniel Davis Deep Dive and make sure they use the whole title, Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We'll keep on building this army one friend at a time. Stay unintimidated and uncompromised, and we will see you next time on our show. Oh, and by the way, we have a special show tomorrow, kind of a special edition, looking at the 3-year anniversary of the withdrawal from the Afghanistan war after 2 disastrous decades. I'm going to look on it, watch that with a fellow Afghan veteran, Matt Ho. We're going to look at some things that have been happening over the time. You will not want to miss this. If you care anything about what actually happened there, tune in tomorrow. Thanks, and we'll see you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.